wanted to introduce each of them to you. I know that we already did introductions this morning, but just to recap, Sean Nash is the District Online Learning Coordinator from North Kansas City Public Schools in Kansas City, Missouri. Anthony Gabriel is the Supervisor of Learning Development and Professional Growth from Garnet Valley School District in Pennsylvania. Michelle Rybent, the Director of 21st Century Learning, from the Michigan Department of Education. Barbara Suits, the OER Program Manager from the Washington Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. Every Department of Education has a different name, just so you know, that's the Department of Ed. And Erin Thompson, who is our Secondary Curriculum Facilitator from Cedar Rapids Community Schools in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. You get to turn it over, and that's all you need, actually. Great.
Awesome.
And you have your mics. You're all good?
Yes.
They're working.
Yep.
Hello.
Okay. Very cool. So I am absolutely pleased to be able to point at some really, really, really fantastic people. Getting to know them a little bit and their work has been absolutely my pleasure. And very interestingly, we were talking today, I was thinking in my head that when we first met, we had a series of 6 questions we were kind of looking at. And there is such a wealth of knowledge on this table that we decided on the fly that day that we would not curate that down, but cull, because I don't want to misuse the term curation because it's not an event. I learned that today. So we have culled that down to really a couple of questions that we've pinpointed as the key, that we feel will probably generate more conversation back at the tables for each of us. So really, if we can start with one that I think always comes up anytime I talk about this work with anyone, and that is about entry points, right? So it's always fascinating to see where a particular district or state or school got started in this work and why. So really, that entry point, what was your entry point in your state or district, and why was that? Barbara, if you would start with us.
Get to start. Can you guys hear me? Is this on? Cool. So our entry point was actually legislation, which was passed in 2012, which basically said that our Department of Ed would create a collection of openly licensed resources and an associated awareness campaign to let districts know that these were materials that were out there and available to be considered when they were adopting. Oh, I just got louder. When they were adopting instructional materials. What we did, first of all, was actually a state snapshot of what were those barriers that districts seemed to be having when they were considering instructional materials that were openly licensed. And really, we got a lot of answers back, but they all kind of bubbled up into 4 areas, which were some of the things that Joseph had mentioned, and I'm going to go really briefly. But they were policies that didn't address open resources for adoption. Locating resources, where do you find those really high quality full courses and rich units? How do you know that they're good? How do you know what the quality is there? And the last thing was, how do you make sure that there's equitable access in technology if you have digital delivery of resources? Just a quick note, it turns out that policy lever was way more important than I thought it was, and that the technology aspect was not as big of a perceived, it was not as big of a deal as was originally perceived.
So it might be interesting if we go from state level. Michelle, you go to state level, and then we'll do the 2 districts, just to see if there are any comparisons that way.
And it's interesting you say that, Barb, because we entered through a technology initiative, and all of a sudden we had a lot of technology going out through a separate initiative to get students ready for online testing and online learning. And so with over 600,000 devices going out, we knew that the time was right to truly migrate to high-quality digital content use. And so when we kind of dipped our toe in that high-quality digital content world, we saw that there was a lot to it around at what level, like where are you going to enter, at a whole curriculum level or at a supplemental materials level, and then where were teachers in their readiness. So we hit upon a social studies initiative because there weren't really any nationally available social studies resources because it's pretty state specific. And so we had funding that a lot of our ambassador districts jumped in on as part of the implementation of that social studies work, with the statewide creation of social studies curriculum support resources that were digital and high quality, and now very vetted and through their probably, I would say, third revision state collectively. So just the organization of that and the hitting upon a platform that would support this. We did a lot of really strategic work about selecting a platform and then the partnerships needed to get that funded and in place has been really exciting. And I feel like the time is sort of right and a lot of things crystallize around that moment.
Very good.
So I am at a district level, and we entered into this space during a traditional curriculum adoption cycle. So middle school ELA, we were up for new textbooks. So we started the traditional process and realized that besides HMH, nobody else was printing a hardcover student textbook anymore for secondary ELA. In case you didn't know that, that is true. So, so the traditional textbook adoption was not going to work for us, and I went back to the executive director of instructional services and said, we're not going to be able to do a traditional textbook adoption. This is going to be a bigger thing than we know. I'm going to go talk to our tech director, our technology director in the district. And it is one of those convening of perfect things at the same time. I went down to her office to see if she was available, and one of the other folks that works with integration of technology happened to be sitting in her office at that same time. And I walked in and I said, hey, here's the situation. We're going to have to do this, and what is this going to mean? And they both looked at each other. And when my friend Holly said, well, there's this thing called like OER and this Go Open movement. I think you need to learn about this. And so a week later, I showed up in San Antonio at iNicole, and they said, go to everything that says OER and Go Open. I was like, okay. And I did. And then less than like 4 weeks later, we were a Go Open district. So Holly, actually, our tech integration person, had approached our director of instructional services about a year and a half earlier and said, hey, there's this thing we should consider. And our director was like, I don't know. And so because I was willing to say, yep, we can test that out, we can run it. And now we are expanding and we're into social studies, thanks to Michigan, because they got awesome resources. And we have started to expand to all of our other content areas. But had it not been just that right person and that right time, I don't know that we would be where we are right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
So 5 years ago, I was part of a brand new hire group in Garnet Valley, and I would say about 80% of our instructional leadership team was brand new. Our superintendent, assistant sup, and out of the 80% that were brand new, about 90% of us were from out of district. Prior to us getting there was a superintendent that had been there for 21 years. So you can imagine what that was like all of a sudden now with, all these new people and all these new ideas. And so out of that, our focus with our new superintendent and the team he brought in has been really for the past 5 years around personalized learning through authentic and purposeful innovation. And district-wide, strategically, and then strategic level and the organizational level, some of our major areas of focus are student achievement, obviously, management of systems, because in a district that had the same superintendent for a long time, we had no systems in place, and fiscal responsibility and professional learning were two of the other pillars we were really looking at. And so we got to the district, and the initial work started around student-centered instructional design. We partnered with the University of Pennsylvania and the Penn Literacy Network and started doing a lot of work with our teachers around instruction and what does that look like today, and this was in 2012. We also didn't have a curriculum cycle, so then we shifted to, and that was my role, was student-centered curriculum design and understanding by design. And then we realized we didn't have, as resources were starting to come up and you started talking to teachers, they weren't really using paid resources. Well, yeah, we buy these textbooks, but we use like 3 chapters, or we use the homework sets. And I actually was approached my first year by one of our 9th grade teachers, Christine, and she said, for social studies, and she said, hey, did you guys ever think about paying us to write our own kind of courses and textbooks rather than, buying? And I said, I love that idea. We didn't have the infrastructure, we didn't have the technology, back then. Less than 30% of our classrooms had technology. Nobody had laptops. So we had to play this sort of 3-year game of catch up there. And then once we were ready, we reached back out to Christine and to her counterpart, Dave, and said, listen, we have a curriculum cycle now. It's collaborative. It's ongoing. We want to do OER with you. How are you guys game? And they said, this is awesome. And so it was one class and 2 people that first year that really dove in. And that was really our first foray, and we were able to work with them collaboratively. We had built trust over the past couple of years, and so we were able to get really honest feedback in terms of what kind of PD they needed, what kind of support, the amount of hours it was taking. And so for us, from a system standpoint, from a fiscal standpoint, from a student achievement, professional learning standpoint, it made more sense for us if we know that the teachers are one of the most impactful elements on our kids. Why are we sending 70% of our resources outside the district? Let's put it all into them. Let's reallocate. Let's focus on high-level instructional design, course design, student-centered resource design, and curriculum design. So that's kind of how we ended up, just through a teacher asking and all the other sort of extraneous cultural shifts we were making. We sort of fell into this, reached out to a colleague, A.Z. Giuliani, said, hey, do you know anything about OER? We had some teachers ask. And he said, oh, well, let me hook you up with Go Open. And got in touch with Christina, and here I am. So.
Yeah, those connections are huge, absolutely huge, in getting the right people in the right room at the right time. And just very briefly, because you were at district level, and these things sort of serendipitously came up. I'm a science person, and our initiative in our district started with science. I know you are ELA people originally, and I know you've done a lot of your early work in ELA social studies. So can you just say something briefly? Would this have gone differently had the entry point been science, or like if that curriculum adoption would have been in science or math, or is there anything you could speak to that?
Well, in our situation, like we had adoptions in years prior to me getting, and we had technology folks who were saying, you should look at this, and it didn't work. So it did take somebody with the willingness to learn and to dig in. And so then because of I'm doing that work, I have spread that out, and we've continued to grow that now. But like I missed a meeting on Wednesday night where we started meeting with AP Calculus teachers. And there are some great resources out there. And I wasn't in that meeting, and I was in all the prep meetings. But I wasn't in that meeting, and I got a text and said it didn't go well. They saw a shiny new textbook sitting there next to that OER resource, and it didn't go well because we have some pretty staunch traditional teachers for AP Calc. So I already sent an email. I'm like, I got to get back with those teachers. Like, let's bring them back in. And so it really just, relationships and perception, all important in that process.
And I think maybe comfort with the content at a really deep level to have that conversation with those folks. What do you, Anthony?
I would say it's the same. I mean, they approached us, the 2 teachers that we worked with initially. And so, this year we're writing 7 courses, and our biggest pushback is math and science. There's not the high quality diagrams out there like we get with this resource. And one of the things, our table questions I had asked when we did the questioning activity earlier was, how do you get teachers past that insecurity or mindset that, well, if I pay for it, it must be good, right? And Stanford helped develop this textbook. Well, guess what? There's also some free stuff at Harvard that's really good too, and so it's having those conversations. So I think for us, it was less about the content area. It was more about the people that chose to step out.
Got it. Makes perfectly good sense. So the last thing, really, with the time that we have, we could give each of these folks 30 minutes on their own very easily. But in the interest of time, we'll move to our final element here. And I want to talk about something that really Christina introduced us, I believe, to a term called a chopportunity. You familiar with this one? Okay. So it has nothing to do with bikes. But a chopportunity is where you've taken something that was a challenge and you've made that an opportunity. And oftentimes it's those opportunities, if you will, that become kind of that nugget of really golden stuff that you would want to sit down with these individuals? What is that thing that you're doing that you guys have really nailed? And it typically comes from a challenge. And I can't cite where Chopportunity came from, but Christina tells me it was probably Canada, so we don't have to cite across the border. I think there's a tariff on it. Okay, so I think we can go down the line on this one, right? So what was your Chopportunity, or what is that thing that for the rest of the day, the folks sitting with you at your table probably want to hear about?
Good to start again. Okay, so we have a lot of districts that are actually starting to create and develop material, which is fantastic. But the challenge is getting it outside of their district and allowing it to be shared with other districts. And some of the concern is certainly technical. I mean, they're developing it in different platforms, they're using different LMS systems. There's, a lot of it is locked behind their district and not available to the public. But there are a lot of other issues that we're having too, and those resolve really about a readiness to share. A lot of the stuff that they've curated, they might not legally be able to distribute widely. There's some misconceptions about attribution and licensing and copyright, which everybody's nodding their head. Yes, this is a problem. And also there's it's not quite perfect yet. And it's not shiny and glossy, and it doesn't have all the pretty images. And there's the old adage, perfection is the enemy of good. And so you have to get over that hurdle. So what we've been able to do is we're calling them OER boot camps. We bring together our grantees. We bring together content-specific groups. And we're kind of modeling it after the book sprints that higher ed does. And so they're bringing products that are almost finished. We work with them on the licensing. We have experts there to talk to them about attribution and copyright. We help them upload it to OER Commons. And so these have been a really good opportunity to help get the resources ready for sharing. We've had a really nice collaboration with our Office of Secretary of State. So I'm just going on Monday to a social studies event where they've given me their unit topics. I've been able to reach out to the Secretary of State, to the library, to the archives, and they're pulling primary resources, all of which are in print. And what they're doing is they're pulling resources for us, and they're giving priority to digitization of those resources that teachers actually need and will be using. So it's a nice opportunity for collaborating.
So I think collaboration, definitely teacher collaboration for us, and empowerment and ownership have been huge in terms of, for the first time, especially at the secondary level, people having a chance to work together and share resources like, hey, we've taught together for 20-something years, and I've never actually seen what you do, yet we teach the same subject. So sort of that sharing of best practices, and what that's led to, the other big, we're very naturally a high-performing district, so change comes slow. And so we are now being faced with a lot of online and blended learning requests from our students. We were losing almost $1 million a couple years ago to cyber schools. And so our theory was, well, let's start our own e-school, and we'll pay you guys to not only teach it, but start writing the curriculum. And so through the collaboration and the empowerment, our teachers are becoming more comfortable with digital resources. And we've actually had about 10 teachers over the past year and a half say, hey, rather than use, because we did have to purchase a canned curriculum at first for the e-school, they're like, hey, rather than that, can we just write our own? And we're like, yes, right? So it's that lesson design, the curriculum design, the resource design, and now we're moving into sort of that course design and digitization piece, which is our last of sort of completes that circle for our courses.
And I believe that element of the work, I don't even remember that part coming up in our conversation. That's exactly what I do. So we've got more to talk about.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that too in Michigan. But our really opportunity was the timing of all of this. So the technology resources that became available, and then the adoption of the standards in our state, which are next generation science standards based. And we had a really good opportunity there because two of our universities have been very involved in the creation of really high quality digital content in support of those next generation science standards. And they were so willing to share their collections. And so by magnifying the strength of all the work that's been done in a lot of disparate sites here and there, that really has been the power of the work, I feel, is to bring it all together under one umbrella, and then have all of the designers be willing to accept the remixing and reuse. And then I'm particularly interested in the impact it's having on student learning for the student achievement end. So we're really monitoring all that very closely. It's great. It's just a perfect timed project.
Well, and you're one of the few people that I've talked to where, and I've heard multiple times today, that with the emergence of really user-friendly learning management systems, that is instantly becoming just a whole host of little walled gardens that's hiding a lot of this. And I know we talked a little bit about some of the work that you've done that can kind of stitch that together, at least in Michigan.
We're always keeping an eye on interoperability, and that did come up as one of the things at our table. And so we did a lot of work to select a platform, OER Commons, for our state work, and we created a microsite therein. And then happily, and just shout out to ISKME and OER Commons, because in the background they were working on those API connections to some of the larger LMSs, and they're in wide use in Michigan, happily. So for us, from our state planning team, that's going to eliminate a whole level of professional learning requirements, because we'll do the work to connect our microsite to their LMS, and for them it will be a seamless, brand new batch of resources available to them in their LMS. So I love when technology meets need so perfectly, especially when it's for us. So when I heard that on a call, on one of our recent development calls, I just about fell off my chair and said, that cuts out a whole layer for our professional learning group, for those districts that are in those LMSs. And then we're going to work very hard to get those other LMSs to do the same. And that's going to be huge for the speed at which this can happen.
Certainly, yeah. Erin?
So our opportunity, I guess it would be, is to get into the classrooms around instruction. So in our district, we had enacted some district curriculum, but had necessarily no control over whether or not teachers were actually teaching that and shifting their instructional practices. And so when we made the decision to do this work with our middle school teachers, we pulled a teacher team together, and so we called them our Phase 1 implementation team, because we said this isn't going to be a pilot, so there's no point in calling you a pilot group. So Phase 1 implementation team, and so we then brought in and spent time around professional learning around student-centered classrooms and blended learning and the tech pieces and the things that the shifts in instructional practices we were hoping had been taking place in our classrooms that maybe hadn't been yet. So kind of like what Anthony was talking about, we have some high-performing schools where our students learn in spite of our teachers. And so we're really using this as an opportunity to really look at instructional practices. And so then we will bring on Phase 2 implementation team. So we are pulling teachers who are interested. We are not forcing it at this point in time because it's not perfect. It's not a shiny thing that we can say, here is this beautifully developed, we've been working for a year and a half. Like, we've been working for a year and a half and it's still not beautiful. Like, and so here's this thing that we're working on and we're still developing and we're still working to make it perfect. And so who wants to be part of that work? Our other challenge is that comfortability with teachers sharing with each other. So we still have like this nervousness of, is what I'm doing good enough? And do I really want to share that with other people? So I've really had to be building self-esteem of my teachers in this process. Like, you are doing the right things, and this is good stuff to share with each other. And so we have the teachers on that Phase 1 implementation team are considered to be lab classroom teachers this year. So we've started to shuffle some of our other teachers through and say, come look, come see what's happening in some of the changes that we're making. So it was our way to get into some of the instructional practices happening in our district.
Awesome. So it looks like we have about 4 minutes left, which is super perfect here. As we went around that round, particularly Erin, when you finished, I think it would just be interesting, you were mentioning your implementation teams, and I know that the implementation teams that all of us have are, unique. They're unique to our own community. They're unique to our organization. So if you could just say, here I am, Aaron, here's my role, and here's where I fit within that implementation team. If you guys could, so we'll start with you. Yeah.
Okay. So I am actually the district coordinator for our Go Open work in general. So I also lead an advisory team in the district, and so that has like our deputy superintendents, our tech directors, and all of the other folks at the district level. And so I facilitate that, which we meet quarterly, make some decisions, our mission, our measurements, all that kind of stuff. And then I am leading the ELA implementation teams, and on those teams we have teachers from each of our buildings. So in our district, like we have 6 middle schools, so we make sure we have representation from each of those schools, as well as then our special ed, our talented and gifted, and then our tech people and our assistive technology people. And so we go through and do the work as a team. And then like we just started our high school teams this fall, and same thing within their team. Also some of the instructional coaches that we have in district are part of that work. And so facilitate those monthly meetings and some of that kind of stuff.
Contrasting with the state.
Yeah, and I'm in the technical, it's called the P20 Data and Information Management Office, which we house the Educational Technology Unit, and where my boss handles the integration of systems at the state level within the Department of Education and with our partners in management and budget and other state offices. I work with the integration to local districts and intermediate school districts. So our partnerships are to try to create seamless technologies from the student to the classroom to the teacher on up. So that has to do with accountability data transfer through multiple systems, and then curriculum and instructional support materials work. So that has been perfect. And our educational technology unit within that group manages a series of grants that support local districts and intermediate school districts in that seamless establishment of a really great ground-up technology system.
Very cool. Mm-hmm. And back down to the district level.
So I am one of 2 supervisors in the district. I'm Arts, Humanities, and Literacy, and been working with my background in technology for years in the classroom and with Penn. Just kind of this fell into my lap. It was like, well, OER makes sense for you, along with federal programs and everything else. So I work very closely with our technology director of innovation, technology, and online learning. He handles a lot of the eSchool stuff. I handle the curriculum and OER stuff, but there's obviously a ton of overlap. We also have a team of 5 librarians, 1 from each building that we've engaged in the work, obviously, because the eventual goal is to not have to pay anybody anymore to come in and do PD, is to self-sustain this. And then also we have 4 instructional coaches, instructional technology coaches. So and then Dave and Christine are kind of our phase 1. So that's sort of the initial team. So it's 2 admin, 5 librarians, 4 coaches, and 2 teachers. And so we're now doing a lot of the turnaround during our blended and our individualized PD days and that sort of thing. So like I said, the goal there would be to eventually pull away from having to really pay for any of this and really do it all in-house. So we're probably a couple years away from that.
That fingerprint is so different district to district. And back to Washington State, Barbara?
Yeah, so I'm actually housed in the Learning and Teaching Department at OSPI. And although I'm a department of 1, essentially, that my position is responsible for implementing the legislation to carry out the OER work. However, we have a huge OER planning team at the agency, and it's a really nice cross-agency collaboration of content specialists and education technology specialists, special ed. And so we have monthly meetings where we kind of talk about the trajectory and what we'd like this to look like. I also interface a lot with our educational service districts. We have 9 of them in our state. And so when we're doing things like hosting OER summits, I can reach out to them and they can help in recruiting individuals to attend and district teams. So there's just a really nice infrastructure in the state to help support the work.
Awesome. All of you are awesome. Please join me in thanking our panel for sharing.